Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Can you hear me back there?
Just hold it closer.
All right.
You can pass it around.
Yeah, we'll just shove it down. Okay.
Or hold it.
Yeah, we could. We could. So Susan was one of the few authors asked to participate in the library convention. So it's a big honor. So she is in the Midwest right now. But, is this an amazing panel? All of these people are featured heavily in the book. And I'm so excited to get to talk to you guys. But before that, I want to show a little video. This was my introduction to Susan, and it's just a few minutes of a short documentary made by my friend Tessa Blake.
I was locked up for 4 years. That's a long time. I was happy to be out, but still scared. Because, I guess because we're creatures of habit. And you want to feel secure and safe. They drive you to the bus station and, they give you $200 and they buy your ticket out of your money and put you on a bus. And you're just headed to wherever. And so I arrived downtown LA, and it was really scary. And I looked like I came from prison, I was dusty looking, with jeans and a paper bag. Everybody knows that you're from prison. They know. Just by the way you look, and they know. You get approached by everybody. There were people asking you if you needed a ride, telling you that you look fine. Drug addicts, people living that life, and you know they are. It's so easy to get lured, especially if you're scared. And I'm going to be honest, I was scared. And I felt like I was just standing there buck naked. I didn't have any place to go. I really didn't. And I called Miss Burton, and I told her, I said, I received a letter from you, and you said for me to call you, and that you would pick me up. And she says, where are you? And I told her, she says, I'll be there in about 15 minutes. And she came and picked me up. So to come into a place and be able to drink out of a glass and not plastic, to sleep on a mattress and not metal, and to have food, have choices, just stuff people take for granted. Miss Burton's so sweet. She's a good lady. I'm glad she picked me up. This house is the beginning of a new way of life. I got it in 1998 and fashioned a house for women who had been incarcerated. And that's where I started. When I left prison, I went to treatment and got a job, and I saved the money, and I saved about $12,000. Yeah, and I saved every dime. Some months I didn't spend but $40 a month for anything that I needed, and everything else I saved, and I didn't understand why or what I was saving for. I didn't know I was on my way to creating something that would have the ability to change lives. I tried to give help in the same fashion that I had received.
By the way, before we begin, I know it's hot out, and it can get quite stuffy in here. I'm usually on that side of the table, and stuffy as in temperature, not the people. So help yourself to any, feel free while we're talking to make your way through. There's cold drinks, frozen desserts. Please help yourself. So that clip featured Susan and a glimpse of one of the homes of a new way of life. And Susan and her foundation now have 5 homes, all in South LA, in Watts, and Compton, and around 1,000 women and their children have made their way through the homes. And I saw this film at a charity event, and Susan was there, and I ran up to her after and said, "I think you have a book in you." And she gave me a very intense stare, not unlike the one on the cover of the book. Tiffany's laughing. This stare told me, and rightly so, that she was a force to be reckoned with. And it took a little convincing. And then 2.5 years later, here we are with the book. So the book is Susan's life story. It's through her eyes. But the people on this panel were integral to that life story. And they're all featured heavily in the book. I think you all have at least a chapter, if not more. So I'm delighted to introduce everyone. So right here we have Tiffany Johnson. Tiffany first heard about a new way of life on the grounds of Central California Women's Facility while serving a 15 to life sentence. 7 years ago, was it only 7 years? Oh my God. She was released and walked through the doors of a new way of life. A few years later, she joined the staff as a full-time community organizer, and she is now a New Way of Life's associate director and will one day fill Susan's shoes should she ever retire. One of her board members is laughing. As a subject matter expert, Tiffany speaks throughout the country on the intricacies of overcoming reentry barriers after incarceration. Next, we have Saul Sarabia. Saul has devoted his life to developing social movements to end structural racism and discrimination. He has a law degree from UCLA and was the director of UCLA School of Law's Critical Race Studies program, where he and his students partnered with community organizations working for social change. They challenged racism in the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina. They helped undocumented college students unite and build a social movement, and most notably, worked with Susan Burton to create a joint UCLA Law, A New Way of Life legal reentry clinic, which is held monthly in Watts and Long Beach. And it assists formerly incarcerated people in fighting employment discrimination. And we have Antoinette Carter, whom I know as Tony. And Tony is the daughter of Susan Burton. Tony grew up in South Los Angeles, and her mom was in and out of prison for much of her childhood, for about 15 years, for nonviolent drug offenses. Tony broke the cycle. She attended UCLA and is now a human resources executive at a Fortune 500 company, and the mother of 2 children and several pit bulls. These are the best trained pit bulls you've ever seen. Which is a testament to Tony. We'll get to that. All right. So I have spent a lot of time with you 3. We have had a lot of hours talking over the past couple of years. And you are all inspirational, but no one gets to be inspirational without going through some stuff. And all of you have been through some stuff. So I'd like to begin by asking about the process of being interviewed for the book, which in large part dredged up a lot of that stuff. And Tiffany, I'll start with you, because you, like Susan, use your life story and some very tragic events to help others. And what struck me so much when I first met you is your openness and your self-awareness. You took responsibility for your actions, but you also empowered yourself so that those actions didn't go on to define the rest of your life. And I'm wondering about that evolution, because I imagine that was very challenging, and it took a lot of courage. And I'd love if you could talk a little about that.
Hi, everyone. Do you mind if I just take this off? It feels a little bit more comfortable. Cari, so as Cari said, that I'm much like Susan, who's had a traumatic childhood, life experience, but we're different in subtle ways, right? I went to prison in 1994, and I was sentenced to, I took a plea bargain. I wasn't sentenced. I took a plea bargain that held 15 years to life. I didn't understand the concept of it. I was told one thing, in essence, there was something else. So I was told by my public defender that I will only do 7.5 years on this 15 to life, even though I was a victim. And 7.5 sounded okay because I did do something. I did take part in something, but there was so much more that led up to that. That was never discussed. And because I had never been in the criminal justice system before, I was really naive. I knew nothing, and I trusted in this public defender. In that, during my time, I had to keep asking the question, what brought me here? I completely didn't understand, and couldn't nobody tell me that. So I had to begin to look within myself and drudge up a whole lot of painful stuff. And by the 10th year, or even the 5th year, I think I had it mastered, and I could have came home. But instead, I had to fight real hard to get out. So I got out after 16 years.
Yeah. Tiffany's chapter in the book it's stunning. I mean, and we're going to touch on more of what you said. I have some more questions about those, about giving up your rights and things like that. There's a lot of in-depth discussion in the book. All right, I'm going to hand this. Oh, Tony has her own microphone. Tony, you're next. Saul, we're skipping over you for 1 sec. Yeah. We'll get back to you. Don't worry. So, Tony, you were reluctant at first to be interviewed for the book, and maybe reluctant is putting it mildly. I think you're pretty adamant that you didn't want to be involved, and I can understand why. There were a lot of ups and downs in your relationship with your mom. So I was wondering what made you decide to open up, and how did telling your story affect your relationship with your mom and affect you?
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't necessarily feel that there's been an effect in either direction from my perspective. I have talked to my mom, and for her, there were a lot of things that went on in our lives that we never discussed. I'm a very private person, as you know, and I think what came out of it was my mother better understanding who I am, how I am, and why I am, and why I was so reluctant. The guardedness, I would say. What came to me was a thought about probably my brother. I thought about my brother was killed April 8th, 1981. I was a math major. I'm a math numbers person. I remember dates, times, places. I have a photographic memory.
Which made interviewing Tony and writing the book so much easier.
I can literally close my eyes and take myself back to a time and space and give you exactly details, colors of the walls and things of that nature, and I can literally go back to 1969 with those thoughts. So for me, there was always a negative space in my mind about my brother's death and the tragedy of it and him dying in vain. And so for me, there was an air that left me with everything happens for a reason, and everything that's taken place since then, the struggles, the triumphs, and everything that my mother has gone through has made his death not so in vain for me.
I should mention, too, that you talked about your extraordinary memory for details, and it was an interesting triangle we had because I would interview Tony, and we would talk and talk and talk and talk, and then I would write pages and give them to Susan, Tony's mom, and a lot of the information, it was the first time Susan was learning of things that she didn't realize Tony knew or remembered or felt. And so it was an interesting dynamic. And
it was a Bermuda Triangle.
Every book has its challenges, yes. All right, Saul. So for you, a little different take on this as we're talking about family. Your family dynamic is quite interesting. You were the first in your family to go to college. You had never met a lawyer until you went to UCLA Law. And you took a very different path from many of your family members and many of the people you grew up with. You were in a community where a lot of people got caught up in drugs and cycles of incarceration, and yet you went off and did welfare reform and went to law school. And so I'm wondering if you could talk more about this, your trajectory diverging.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all here. I guess where I'd start is for those of you who are from LA, just providing a little bit of context. I was raised in Northeast LA, which is now undergoing significant gentrification. But in the early 80s, I grew up there until I was 15. Something really critical happened, which was that neighborhood structures such as gangs, which in many ways provided a lot of social bonding for young people. And when your parents were working in factories and in some of the lowest paid jobs here became your extended family, were targeted by the California prison gangs as ways to move drugs for the first time in a significant way during the height of the cocaine epidemic. And that, I think, made things in neighborhoods like Cypress Park, where I went to junior high school, and Highland Park, which, believe it or not, was a very poor area at the time. The stakes, just the violence and the poverty, I think, just took on a different meaning. And one of the moments of realization for me that we were relating to this underground economy, which was really sustaining a lot of people that were poor in Southern California, was changing. Was this sense that people were being drafted into, conscripted into an economy, a set of demands from people that use drugs on low-income families that were situated in such a way where drugs could be moved. And so I remember in 8th grade, we got a microwave for the first time in my house. And at that time, only very rich people, in my eyes, had microwaves. And so I felt like something had changed in the economy of my household, but also in the political economy of the city. My father, who worked in a factory assembling sofas, and my mom, who worked in sometimes the same factories on the upholstery side, making the outside of the couches, had always, I was kind of like in awe of my dad and was almost afraid of, like, he was so strict, I was almost scared of him. And he would just say, we're very poor, but we work, and we're very poor, and your family members or people around you that have stuff and got it in this other way, they're just making bad decisions or bad choices. And somewhere along the line, I think he just went from you can't beat them, join them, and something happened in our household where that changed. For my brothers who were in the adolescence age where you get recruited into gangs, there was a lot to be gained by being the member of a gang who could bring resources and participate in this economy in a certain way. I remember in the 8th grade writing a short story. I don't think I ever shared this with you.
Oh, I don't know this.
Because there was so much stigma attached to this, and I mean, we were all poor, but I knew that there was something else happening that I didn't really feel safe to talk about. So I wrote down a little story and I shared it with my best friend at the time. It was called Trapped, an emotional short story. I gave it a subtitle. So, that began my trajectory with all of the horrors of addiction. And so I ended up we moved when I was 15. And we're in the San Gabriel Valley, in a more suburban area where there was also a lot of drug use and drug sales. But it was also this time period where a lot of families who were participating in an underground economy and responding to a demand all over. My house in high school was a place I was afraid to come home too often because there was so much traffic of people coming in and out. And so I don't know that there's a moment in which there's a decision on my part, like I'm not going to do this, I'm going to be the guy, but there was just a set of forces that led me to kind of be the good kid in the family and wanting to do something different. And on some level of it, I think too was an idea that school could be an escape from all that. And so even though I had no idea that there was something called graduate school or professional school, you go get a law degree, I just knew there was college and that none of us had been there and that I wanted to go there. I just kind of like decided that's where I was going to dive into. And it took me a while to get to a point where I could have some compassion and understanding and critical analysis of what choices were being made by the people in my extended family and my immediate family. When I was 18, I was a rabid Reagan Republican.
What?
Yes.
All right, that shocks me.
And I was very Catholic, but also closeted in terms of my sexuality. And so I think part of what was going on for me is I was searching for some kind of structure that I could hold on to and make sense of the world. At the same time, I had a deep appreciation for what I had learned and the relationships I had with the people I grew up with and the people in my family. And so I appreciated that. And part of the thing that I think drew me to Susan when I finally met her was, no matter what kind of craziness was happening in my head, to understand my process, I just didn't drink the juice. I guess I had some class consciousness and I had some race consciousness, and I knew that there was some other story besides there's good people, there's bad people, you're part of the bad people, there's something wrong with your family.
And what's so interesting too is that you use your family and people you knew, you use the drug dealer model to provide examples for how to recruit for a social movement. So you really utilize your background, as the whole panel does. I think that's one of the themes here. for sure. And it's fascinating. You have a book in you too? Trapped. Yes, trapped. Tiffany, so one thing that you brought up before about the plea bargain, I'd like to talk more about that and other realms of how the system is so unjust. One of the points that's stressed in the book is that for incarcerated women, many of their rights were violated before they ever set foot in a prison cell. And most incarcerated women were victims first. That is a statistic that is around 90%. So it's not just most; it's almost all of women in prison were victims first of physical abuse, of sexual abuse. And one right that is commonly given up, as you mentioned, is the right to a trial. It's a myth. That there is a right to a trial in this country, because if everyone chose to go to trial, everyone charged with the crime chose to go to trial, it would crash the system. The system isn't designed for everyone to go to trial. So there are these plea bargains that are offered, and you can speak more to that if you'd like. And when you had turned yourself in, you thought the truth would vindicate you. You trusted in the system, but it failed you. And one of the really poignant moments I remember that's in the book is you went into prison thinking 7 years, and on the prison yard somebody laughed and said, you have an L behind your name. That's not 7 years. So, in terms of all these ways, and the book focuses very specifically on women, but in terms of all these ways that women give up their rights before entering the cell, getting out of the cell. It's a very broad question, so you can take it where you want. Very broad.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't read the book, and let me just give you a little bit about why we talk about me being a victim, and not only me, but so many women who experience traumatic things in their lives before grade school and before high school, are all through those years, right? So as a little girl, I was 3 of 4. My mother had 4 girls, and I was the third one. I'm a little nervous. Sometimes you can talk about your life and be so completely relaxed and comfortable and just spill it. And then there are other times where you feel every emotion of that past as if it's happening right then, right? And so this is the space I'm in. Why, I don't know.
Because there's a room full of staring at you.
At the age of 5, my mother brought home this guy. It was my birthday, and she forgot, and she woke up that morning and was like, "Oh my God, I forgot it's your birthday. Let me go get you some presents." 5-year-old girl, I'm so happy because at least she's going. Right. Well, when she came back with an armful of presents, as promised. But she also came back with this guy, an older man, and from that day, I became his special little girl. All right. And so he groomed me very well to be in a lovingly relationship with him for 5 years. So that's my background. After that, he stopped when, young girls get their puberty, and we couldn't explain me at 10 years old having a child, so our relationship pretty much ended. And it's sad to say that I look at it like that as our relationship, but it was when I do sit back down and dig into the deep recesses of my mind and my heart, he didn't hurt me, He groomed me to be his whatever. at 5 years old, when you don't have self-esteem, you're learning who you are. So I was taught for many years to be his friend, right? His special little girl. And my life just snowballed from then. It just snowballed. Before I went to prison, as I mentioned earlier, I hadn't a clue that there were prisons for women. None. I knew women got in trouble. I knew that they went to jail, but they always came back, right? I committed a crime that I took ownership in, and I turned myself in, hoping that whoever was in charge would understand, Well, they didn't. They didn't even give me a chance, For 6 months on a very high crime charge, I only did 6 months in a county jail, and then I was off to prison. Most people spend years fighting their case. I didn't get that opportunity. I was rushed through the system, even though they claimed they realized that I was a victim, right? And so when I said that, when I was in there, and I had to take a real good look at what had really brought me there. Yeah, I know I committed a crime, but what was the circumstances behind all of that? My philosophy is, if someone commits a crime, there's always, always, always something attached to that. Why don't we begin to look at the rooted problem, and then we have a better context. And as you said, we are literally forced to take plea bargains because you would get out early and you will be with your children and and your life can go on. And it's like, okay, because I trust you. There's a lot of us behind those walls like that. Yeah. It's sad.
It's really sad, and you had used a public defender because you couldn't afford an attorney, and that's, and we talk a lot about this in the book. The public defender's office is so overwhelmed and understaffed that they literally cannot spend more than 5 minutes on a case. And it's really much easier for them, and they can get on to the next file if you take a plea bargain. And, we have a line in the book that public defender stood next to Susan many times and was no more useful than her own shadow. So the illusion of having representation, that's also an illusion. And at first we came down very hard against public defenders, and then, you think about it, though, who goes into that job? These aren't people who necessarily go in because they just want to lock people up, but they are, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, too. It is the whole system that needs some overhaul.
And in my household, they were called the public pretenders. That's what everyone in my household called them. And as a young child, I could navigate the criminal court system better than a public defender. I've had several conversations with public defenders and even offered suggestions on sentencing or sentence diversions for some of my family members. And so it's not that I didn't believe in the public defenders, but that rock and that hard place, you're really in that situation, and you you would never be able to work in the state of California, let alone maybe the United States, if you as a public defender stood up against that system, was my belief.
And in between that rock and a hard place is a human being. And a human being who often could be much better served with drug rehabilitation, with counseling for mental illness, with a variety of other services that are not offered in prisons. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So, transitioning to a different part of the legal aspect, but a very positive one. Saul, you have known Susan for some 20 years, and you introduced her to activism and to building a movement, and that's a large part of the book. You indoctrinated her. And one of the legacies of your relationship is the legal clinic, the UCLA Law, A New Way of Life legal clinic, which has really taken on a life of its own. And I'd like if you could talk a little more about that, of how it started and how it now has litigated very high impact and class action lawsuits. Some really momentous stuff.
Sure. So I guess just piggybacking on the conversation about how we're all conscripted into the injustices of the current system that we have. I just want to say, as a student, when I went to law school, I think by the time I got there, I had pretty clear idea that there was, a system in which if you had money, you were likely to get a different kind of justice in this country than if you didn't. And I just think that it's important to step back and in that context say, like, there's people who go to law school who become public defenders and who spend their lives trying to do the right thing in a very unlikely situation, given the bureaucracy you were describing, given all of this. And so when I went back to UCLA, where I went to school and met a new generation of folks, this was in 2005, my job wasn't to tell somebody who might want to become a public defender. In fact, the main attorney who's been there for the longest at New Life, this is what he wanted to do with his life, Joshua Kim. And he luckily ended up at A New Way of Life instead. But even if you ask him now, I think there's a part of him who wants to be able to bring the kind of resources and the wherewithal of someone who's done all of this great work at the community-based setting to those that have no other recourse but to work with a public defender. And so I just think, many ways this book is a reminder in every chapter that when you have the kind of injustice that comes from organizing the society around racism, organizing the society around economic hierarchy, it's not that clean cut. There's a lot of really good people that end up wanting and are attracted to trying to do change within the legal system, which was a decision that I made very early that I would not do. Because that's not the role that I wanted to have, and that's not the skill set that I thought would allow me to get people to think broadly beyond a particular case that I might be able to pour hours into. And so going back to the law school, after having done community-based social justice activism, and a good chunk of that being through the Community Coalition, the organization through which I met Susan Burton, which was committed to this crazy idea that not lawyers, not people with law degrees, not politicians, but people who are actually affected by an issue in a democracy should believe and have mechanisms to actually shape laws, implement laws, make laws that are on the books real for them. And in the case of criminal justice, in she mentioned she got the house in 1998 in this video. So she and I met in 1999 when I had been indoctrinated with this crazy thinking. I already had like an orientation towards wanting to do community-based work, but it wasn't until I got to the Community Coalition where I learned what community organizing is and how I might leverage a legal education to advance social movements. And so, you do kind of have to be a little nuts to take this kind of work on. And I ended up doing that work I was out of school for about 10 years when I got a call from the law school saying, we are being pressured by our students who are actually the ones inside of the law school interested in doing racial justice work. The people who were enrolled in the critical race studies program who would then take the legal work at this organization to places that Susan and I only could dream of are people that had already signed up to, on their JD, specialize in critical race studies. And UCLA was the only school of its kind that had this. And so my orientation to that was to try to, from an organizing model, try to help them develop as leaders. And at that time, Susan and I had applied for a grant through a department at UCLA that was also responding to criticism that UCLA as a publicly funded institution wasn't doing enough in the community. It was called the Center for Community Partnerships. And they were giving nominal amounts of money to faculty or staff at the law school who could design projects that partnered students with community-based organizations. So that's why we decided to develop this thing called the Prisoner Reentry Initiative. Our goal at the time was to have a group of students assigned to a new way of life who could support one of their first major advocacy campaigns, and that was the campaign to eliminate the question about criminal record convictions from job applications with the public agencies. And it just so happened that at that time that we were approved, this policy proposal was coming before the LA County Board of Supervisors. And to make a long story short, it was a 2-year grant, and within the first 2 months of that grant, the supervisors voted against this idea for a whole set of reasons. And it was a great opportunity for us because we still had 22 months on this project. And it gave us an opportunity to work with the students and work with the women inside the home and the staff at A New Way of Life around what do you do when you have all of these things stacked against you, the stigma of being formerly incarcerated people who are supposed to go and testify and make arguments about why this law needs to be changed in a particular way. The way in which legal counsel for the county was in Sacramento lobbying against this concept, where we eventually won. We eventually got a statewide law passed that said no public agency in California could include that question at the front end, and it needed to give people an opportunity to show that they were qualified to do the job for which they had applied, and then go through the interview process and then do the background check at the back end. And all of this, for those of us who worked through the organizing model, and for some of the law students who had already come into the law school with a lot of organizing experience. A lot of people had graduated from undergrad, had gone to work in community-based settings, and felt like me that learning the language of the law might give you more power to be helpful to communities that were discriminated against and oppressed. And it was through that laboratory of having students interning at A New Way of Life that we get the first couple who say, this is where I want to practice. Now, Susan doesn't have a law degree, didn't have lawyers on staff. But one of the things I think that's been an ingredient of her success is that she's been incredibly open. She gives people a chance to bring a new idea in and see how she can support it and how it can create alignment with where she's trying to go. And in many ways, it was such a reminder that the same model, when I first met her, she didn't have a 501c. She didn't know what a 501c3 nonprofit status was. She just went and got this house with somebody else and put bunk beds in the bedrooms and went and recruited women in the prisons she had been in and started to bring them, and then discovered there were state regulations and, responsibilities that would come with that. And it was this very DIY model in South LA. And so at that time, they built the legal department. The idea of having a legal clinic was not even in the original grant. We decided to do that after we lost at the county level as an organizing strategy. We thought, if we offer this service to people who need their records clean, we'll attract more people to the organization, and then we can introduce them to the idea of organizing. Not necessarily indoctrinate them, but just introduce them to this concept. And so it really was a strategy around that. Fast forward, there's a full-fledged legal department. There are at least 5 attorneys there now.
6? Are there 6 now? And many of 5. I'm sorry. Many of whom are your former students.
They're students who basically came through the legal clinic and would volunteer on Saturdays. It's a very pretty straightforward process. If you have a record, there's a lot of paper pushing in the law, as you all know, and so the students learned this in their first year. Some of them would go home by Thanksgiving and say, "This is the one thing I've learned in law school, but it's not been in my classes. It's been by going to this organization in Watts on Saturdays, and I know how we can at least file to get a record expunged." But it was a gateway. In many ways, to try to get them to think more critically around, why is this there? Why do we even do background checks? What is driving putting people in prison in the first place for a lot of these things? Why are these statistics showing that there is no connection in the vast majority of cases between the conviction that the person has and the job they're applying for? If you were at 19, you were caught with a joint, and you were sent to, if you were privileged enough, maybe you didn't go to prison, and she describes those differences in the book, right? But if you weren't, and you have the scarlet letter for the rest of your life, now you're 35, you have 2 kids, your record's been clean, you're an upstanding member of society, but this is experienced as a scarlet letter that marks you for second-class citizenship. And so, we talked about there are legal protections on there, but what happens when there aren't lawyers who are actually willing to vindicate that? Because who's going to make a living out of doing expungements for ex-cons? And so we looked at all that, and I think just created an experience for the students to begin to experiment in the way that Susan did. And sure enough, at the beginning, we actually got our hands slapped because most of the other legal clinics were self-help clinics where we might come to a place like this and say, "Do you have a record? Do you want to get it clean?" And then people would come, you'd help them fill out the paperwork, and the nonprofit legal organizations, for liability reasons, would make it very clear, have people sign something saying, "We are not establishing a lawyer-client relationship. We just helped you fill out some forms with some legal advice." So a lot of those forms would never actually end up in an expungement because nobody could follow through if something happened or if it was denied. And so the students from the beginning thought that was crazy, and they wanted to use the clinic as a means towards a bigger end of identifying potential class action lawsuits. And so one of the ones that Cari writes about in that she referenced is there are these background check companies that are making millions of dollars as third parties. So they might go to Walmart and say, "We will do the work of unearthing every applicant's criminal record history just in case they lie on their forms or they are allowed to actually say they don't have one by the law. But if you really want to know this information, it can never really be erased. We will find it for you for a fee." And this particular company is making $11 million a year, I think, just on doing this kind of work. And the students, former students, now lawyers, were just being as creative as this environment called the New Way of Life. They innovated legal theories at one point they asked the question, if I go and apply for credit at a store and they deny me credit, they have to send me a letter saying why. And if I find that the thing that they based it on was something that's 7 years old or older under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the California, the state has and that the federal government has, I can now go back and say you were not actually entitled to deny me this credit. This line of credit based on this old record. And so why is that the case for somebody who's applying for a job if it's 15, 20 years old? And so they were able to bring these cases with these new innovative legal arguments and win against some of these companies, and are now doing things like suing the LA Unified School District and other public agencies that have practices that if you just think about them logically, they don't make any of the sense that you and I would think about why we have this culture of branding these people as others and basically subjecting them to second-class citizenship in a bunch of ways in the society. So we're really proud of them and glad that they're able to actually have a whole department there.
It really is a fascinating part of the book because it's a new way of life's attorneys. And what tends to happen is all these big law firms, some of the biggest firms, pile on for these class action suits that were initiated by a new way of life, by these attorneys operating out of a small office in Watts. Actually, with the case that Saul mentioned against the background check companies, they were still operating out of a garage at Susan's home, and for that one, they got an $8 million settlement. So, really important, notable things going on, and that's what sets a new way of life and Susan apart is the whole activism component. I mean, it's really unique what she has done, and she turns her women. She helps them find the voice and turns them into activists. And so many of the New Way of Life women are registering people to vote. They're advocating for or against certain props. And a lot of these women don't have the right to vote. It's state by state. In California, I think after you complete parole, you get the right to vote back. But yeah, it's really something to see. Okay, one last question for Tony, and then we'll open it up to questions. So, Tony, you were raised primarily by your grandmother, Susan's mom, and Susan's brothers, your uncles, 5 of them, were around the house as you were growing up. And like your mom, they cycled in and out of prison for nonviolent offenses. But they were very protective of you and very kind to you, and they would have you walking around the house carrying a dictionary because they wanted you to increase your vocabulary. And yet they would give you stacks of cash for safekeeping, and Tony would, as a young child, tape the cash to her body and wear it to school. And I'm wondering how your childhood affected your views of being a mother and how it influenced how you've raised your children, one of whom is here. But, yes.
This is my daughter.
Hi, Elise.
She's my oldest. She's 31, and I have a 13-year-old. I think I've always looked at the mistakes that were made by my mom and her brothers and tried to rationalize how I would move forward with my life. My biggest fear was always going to jail. Without even committing crimes, it was a very big fear for me. And trying to, I think, model that in my head. What was it that I needed to do to stay out of jail? the stories that I was told. My mom told me about going to McLaren Hall, which was the juvenile facility for children, when she was a child, and not wanting to go there and not wanting to go to the county jail, going to visit my uncles in the county jail, and understanding as a child that, you have this clock of 15 minutes to sit behind a glass and talk to someone, and you could be, literally in midstream sentence and the phone cut off. And that was the end of your visit, no matter what. And so for me, it was looking at the things that happened, how they happened. It was a delicate balance. I did tell Cari, Lynn, about having a mother and 5 uncles all on drugs at the same time. And I'll start with my brother's death. Again, my brother died April 8th, 1981, and within 1 year of his death, my mom and all 5 of her brothers were all incarcerated in prison across the United States. My mother was in Alaska. I had an uncle in Oregon in prison. I had 2 uncles in Texas in prison with their wives, and 1 uncle in the county jail and another uncle in fire camp. And I'm 15 years old. And for me, it was the pressures of having to support that type of criminal system is an extreme burden for any person. To have the criminal system, it does not incarcerate a person. It incarcerates a family. I remember my grandmother's phone bill in 1982 being $1,400 from collect calls.
And they can only call collect.
And they can only call collect.
And the rates are not they're
astronomical.
Yeah, they're different rates.
Right. We're saying rates of $3 a minute, $5 a minute.
Yeah, they're gouged. Yeah.
And having to prepare care packages to send to people in prison. Today, the prison system has made it very convenient for you. You go to a website, you click on the boxes that you want to send, food, clothing, things of that nature to your loved ones, and it's all sent away to them. In 1981 and 82, you had to go and you had to purchase all of these things. You had to package them. The box could not weigh more than 28 pounds, or I can't remember what, 30 pounds, and I almost said 30. And
if you were an ounce over, it got sent back.
Right. And if you
sent it,
and
the scale was off.
Right. And if you sent it and it was off, it would come back, and it would take months for it to get there, and there was 1 box a quarter. And I'm being real specific, but the pressures of having to navigate all of that as a support system, and I was a child, but it was me and my grandmother. Having to support all of that is tremendous. The visitation. My grandmother was too old and too weakened. I didn't visit that much until I got a little older. As I got older, it was I guess when you look at it and people read the books and they come back to me and they say, how did you navigate that? I did what I had to do to survive. I was literally a straight A student. There was nobody that was going to keep me from going to school. And if you ask my mother, my uncles, anybody, I was not going to go to school. When Saul said it was an escape, it was a serious escape for me. So there was a time where my mom was on drugs, another uncle was on drugs, another uncle asked me to hold, let's say $15,000, and I think it was either $15,000 or $20,000. And I was to safeguard and keep that money, but I was to make sure whoever was on drugs didn't get to that money, take that money away. And so I had 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to figure out, what do I do with this money? And I lived in Los Angeles, but I went to school in the Valley. I graduated from Granada Hills. So I had to be up and out of there and at the bus stop by 6:45. And I called a friend and I said, I need you to come over here, come through my window, because I don't need my grandmother to know what's going on. But I took some duct tape and I taped that money to my stomach. And I wore a sweatshirt and I went to school. And I had a test. And it was very important to me. So understanding how you navigate through all of these different angles and avenues as a support system. The system is designed not only to break the prisoner, but to break the support system. I know so many people who spend their life savings or check to check because they have to make sure that they take care of this person. They have to do this. And so for me, it was understanding the pressures that I had to face and not wanting my children to ever have to face those pressures. And so it was literally a deterrent for me. I mean, the things that went on, the things that I saw on top of, I know today police brutality is a very hot topic. Police brutality didn't start 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Police brutality in the black community has been going on from day one. It's just your story is never believed. Today you have a camera. Today you have a phone. You can take the pictures. You can take the videos. But the things that I saw, and the things that I myself experienced led me to say, if I went to jail, I'd probably never make it out. I can remember being with my mom one time when she was arrested. And I was 5 years old in 1972. And I can remember the policemen arresting my mom, arresting my uncle, arresting my mom's boyfriend at the time, and saying to themselves, what do we do with this child? We don't, where do we take her? What do we do? And I was sitting in a police car. But in that process of them getting to that point of arresting everyone, they slammed through the door. They made everyone get down on the floor, including myself, and I'm 5 years old. I'd been through this routine before. I knew what to do. I knew to be quiet. I'd never been told to get down on the floor, hands behind your back and things of that nature. Those experiences, they made that negative impact on me, but they made such a negative impact on me, it was my duty to make sure that my children never had to go through those experiences. So,
thank you, Tony.
You're welcome. It's emotional, but it is the way life has dealt. I'm happy with the product because what I've explained to my mom is we're all products of our environment, negative, positive, good, bad. We all take the experiences that we have, and those experiences that I went through have all shaped the way I live my life, I do business, and how I raise my kids.
Questions from the crowd? Kimberly.
Hey.
Hi.
I'm curious. I know that I know Cari, and I know that she spent a couple years researching this book, but I would like to know what about this topic for you made you want to do this?
Oh, great question. Thank you. Well, first of all, it's an amazing story, and it's an important story. And I know we touched on a lot of really tough subject matter now, but the book is uplifting as well. I mean, these are amazing success stories. But I also had a personal component. When I was 22 years old, I put a man away for 60 years. A friend and I were carjacked at gunpoint, and this is dating me. We were walking out of Blockbuster Video, and it was my friend's car, but I had the gun to my head. And the driver was apprehended. The gunman fled. But the driver went to trial, and I testified, and there were so many aspects of it that didn't feel right, but I didn't know why. I couldn't articulate. I didn't understand. It was my first involvement with the criminal justice system. So, for example, at trial, about 5 minutes before the trial started, he fired his public defender, and he represented himself. And he was questioning me on the stand with things like, "How do you know it was me?" I said, "Well, I saw you." And, it was so absurd. It was, it was almost comical at the time, and yet there was something so desperate and wrenching about it. And, now, knowing what I know about the system, we talked about public defenders, and it gave so much more reason to some of these events. Another thing he kept saying was that he had graduated high school. He was very proud of that, and he mentioned it a few times during the trial, and each time, my heart ached. And I remember being on the stand feeling so conflicted because it was a very traumatic event for me, and I wanted this guy to be punished. They had found the gun. It was loaded. He had extra bullets in his pocket. I knew that it could have been a lot worse, and I didn't want him to have the opportunity to do this or worse to someone else. But at the same time, something wasn't right. I had these twinges. And years later, I received a letter in the mail. He wasn't up for parole yet, but I'm not calling it the right term, but it's the where you can
MEPD date, maximum eligible parole date.
So, it's a long process. It takes years, but they were asking me if I felt that he should be eligible for the eligibility for the parole, and to write something. If not, like, oh, well, I can write something. And again, all of this conflicting stuff was in my head because I was still having nightmares, and still was uncertain. I wanted this man back on the street, but was also very concerned about what was going on in prison. He'd been so proud that he had graduated high school. Was he able to take college courses? Was he able to get job training? And these were, I didn't have the knowledge to be articulate about these things that were bothering me on a level I hadn't accessed yet. So in doing this book, it allowed me to put all those pieces together, and my only experience with the criminal justice system was as a victim of a crime, and this book allowed me to be on the side of a solution. Meredith.
Do you, anyone can answer, expect it to get worse under Trump?
Yes. I think there is a divide in the community. I don't want to race bait white and black. I think there's a division and a divide amongst races, and I think the division and the divide is growing amongst races with the Trump administration. I see such a destructive environment that they're so busy trying to tear down everything the last administration did that they will never have the ability to focus on what's going on right now. And I think that, I don't think that we're doomed, but I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, if you don't mind?
responding to what you're saying, I think we all see that the most racist elements of society, individuals and institutions, are feeling a lot of permission since his election. They're taking that as a mandate that it's okay to not only reverse everything under Obama, but go way, way back. So is the criminal justice system as an institution being affected by that? In other words, do they feel more emboldened to inflict racist judgments on people, racist sentencing, racist,
So I would think that they'll just feel free to do what they've been doing.
Right.
It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to continue to do, or actually, we don't even need no kind of a reason anymore. Right? Under this administration, they have already redid a war on drugs. Why? Mm-hmm. It's not a war on drugs. It's a war on people. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be hard while he's in administration? Yeah. In a lot of different parts of society, it's going to be hard under his administration. But a new way of life, and Susan, and the organizing and the determination that we know without a shadow of a doubt that we matter, we rise, right? We rise. And we try to get women who are really in the back burner, even in the criminal justice system. You don't hear the conversations of how many women are in these institutions. When I went there, I was amazed. It was a college campus of women, right? But you don't hear about that. And then you don't hear about the effects of it. And you don't hear about what happens to them when they come back to the community. And so, our fight, as is anybody's, we have to stay focused. What is the problem? Not even focus on the problem. How about we start looking at some solutions? And there's so many solutions out there, that we as community should stick by each other. That's all we wanted to.
And I want to point out for me, the social and the economical ramifications of it. In looking at my mother's work and discussing some of the pieces that her and some of the people have presented when we talk about California just as one state, since I believe it's 1980, and either one of you correct me if I'm wrong, California's built one university but 22 prisons. What is the mind state? How are we going to fund these prisons? Where's the money going to come from? If we shut down these prisons and we start with alternatives, what I can see happening is with those that run the prisons, they then look, how are they going to make their next social and economical dollar off of that situation? And what I see happening is this boom of electronic monitoring. And electronic monitoring, someone has to pay for that. So that's still an economical growth for some industry. But we have so many other solutions that can be taken that are not visited because they don't hold enough money in order for those to be powerful and be rich.
California has the largest women's prison in the world, and a few months after it opened, it was beyond capacity. All right, one or two. Vinny, board member of A New Way of Life, featured in the book.
I just would like to say that I've had the pleasure and the privilege of working with the three people up here. And I met Tiffany 7 years ago when she came home. And just to watch what an organization like A New Way of Life can do to transform people's lives, we are able to serve 30 women at a time. We're able to help them reunite with their families. we're able to give power to our women through Saul's training. One of the women I met at a Women Organizing for Justice program came to us. She was in college out in Riverside, and she came to us, and she became one of our when we promoted Tiffany to executive assistant director here. Amber Rose came to us, and I walked into Chuco's the other day, and there she was training people in the community to do this work, to make it fair, to work for bills to be passed, for people to be organized. I've worked with Tony to organize our gala every year so that we can raise funds to keep this going. This is not a little tiny problem. This impacts, as Tony said, the entire family, but the entire community. And if we, as citizens who care about this, don't stick together and speak up when we see injustice, if we don't vote for the right things that we know are the right things, then we're just all wasting our time, and we can read all these wonderful books as possible. But I'm just telling you, the work that these three people right here and Cari have done is just, it's world and life changing. And to empower our women and their families and our community is the most vital thing that we can do. And we really need your support when you get mail from us. I hope you're all on our mailing list after signing up for this thing, and not just to put it on the side with
you can let me know if you'd like to be on the mail.
Organization that is going to just use your money to buy stamps to ask people for more money. Every dollar we get at A New Way of Life changes somebody's life for real. Children meeting their families for the first time. Mothers embracing their children after 18 years, 41 years. It's like really serious stuff. So
and stopping the cycle affects all of us.
Absolutely.
I mean, it does not make neighborhoods safer to incarcerate people. No. That has been proven. So
we just need to
Thanks, Finny. Quick thank yous, Katie Davison, filming this event. Thank you, Katie. But really cool. Katie and her co-director, Natalie, who's around here somewhere, have an upcoming documentary featuring Susan, produced by John Legend. And I'll keep you posted on all that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thank you to Skylight. You guys are amazing. This really is one of the best bookstores in the country. The staff here, they care about books, they care about authors, but they can only do that with your support. So whether it's this book you purchase or any book, purchase a book. Books make great gifts. Please support Skylight and other independent bookstores. And thank you all for your... Yes, thank you. And we'll be signing books. Saul has the last. We'll all be signing books.
One last thank you. Well, for everybody who came here today, obviously, thank you for being here. But to Susan, who's not here, for allowing us to be of service to her work, and just the humility with which she operates, I think, allows all of us to be able to carry that message. But I just want to make a personal thank you to Cari for the work that it took. She started coming to some of the meetings. Susan would ask me to do, can you come and do the basic 101 training for the new cohort of women? Because she's just built it into the DNA, right? That the recovery process is one thing that's essential to it is finding your voice as a citizen. And, they go to AA meetings. They do a lot to deal with trauma and to build community as women. But she's just very clear that part of what helped her was she thought that having a nonprofit organization to do this meant you taught people politics. You taught people about the ramifications of one administration or another. And so she just does this as part of her work. But in that process, just seeing all the people that have come around, it had to take a very special kind of trust in person to be able to just also tell that story in a way that also allowed all of us to learn things about each other that we didn't know, including Vinny. As a board member, I was really impacted. There was a chapter where she was talking about teaching students about the in the Jewish faith what it means to tithe and to serve. And Susan tells the story in that chapter where she gets a letter from Vinny and her students, and the little money they scraped up to help at a moment. What's that? The tzedakah. Yes, where she was just about to give up because she had run out of money. And I didn't know this about Vinny. I just said, okay, somebody else who's kind of crazy like us and is on the board, and we've been working together. I didn't know half of what I learned about Tony, her daughter, who had always been there. Before the CNN Heroes Award, we used to do gala dinners in Watts at this community center where she made this amazing banana pudding my nephew would love to come to have. And then we all had to learn, there's a red carpet event and the people from Orange is the New Black are being honored and there's all these cameras. And, we had to learn about this stuff. And, even learning about, the depth of Tiffany's story. And, for all of you who are writers out there, I just want to also honor you and thank you, because I know that can be often a lonely process. And, the gift that you all give and that Cari's given by allowing even those of us who are actors in the work to get to know our own story and each other is so vital. So thank you all.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.